Forests are important to people because they are where people live. They are where people get their water from. They are where people play. And so forests are integral to most people's lives. If they have an opportunity to get out into forests, it's an opportunity to be alive. They're important to communities because communities rely on them, again, for water, sometimes for fuel.
Well, the first one is economic. America was built by its forests. We built Chicago, built all of New York, all the Penns Woods, Pennsylvania. Forests were the resource that had to be cleared for agriculture, but they built our infrastructure, the ties to the railroads that linked the Pacific with the Atlantic.
I've just always been intrigued with forest and what the forest biologically is. Secondly, I am really intrigued and interested about how people connect to the forest.
A decision by government to take the trees away from their community changed the entire nature of their community. They began to see crime, they began to see issues that they actually tied to the loss of the trees.
During the Great Depression, even though we had plenty of food, I learned that how important it is to understand and become dependent on the land.
Sometimes people aren't necessarily aware always of what it is, but they do recognize that it's part of where they live, and it's an important part of their lives. It's a heritage. It's a cultural thing. It's something that ties to them to the land in a heartfelt kind of way.
I think that in a country like the United States, where forests are a third of the land, forests are going to touch everybody's lives one way or the other, even if they don't think about it that way.
So how do we get people engaged in thinking about the places where they live? Fundamentally, it comes down to the idea of community. People really care about each other in the places where they live in a community. And while people demonstrate the idea that they care for each other, extracting that and taking it to the forest where they live, and to understand fully how to sustain those things.
So the forest, for me, it's sort of whatever a community or society or an individual wants. You know, in most cases, you can provide it. You can find it from the forest. If it's economic returns in terms of communities' local economy, the forest provides products of value. It provides employment. So the forests provide everything. For me, they're sort of the source of our natural life in connection with the earth.
People in my generation have happy memories of playing in the forest. And now that forest is gone as more and more of us live. 80% of us live in urban America. Now, fortunately, with open space concepts, more aggressive parks, streamside valley parks, people can still have an opportunity to connect to the woods. But they won't if we continue to have suburban and exurban sprawl. So forests are very much part of the American psyche. They're integral to our social fabric, as well as our economic fabric.
Fundamentally, I think our forests are in trouble in a lot of ways. We have issues with forest health, we have issues with fire, and then we have, which are pretty obvious, but we have subtle issues like parcelization and invasive plants that people aren't engaged in. And so the Roundtable has the potential to bring that dialogue out and to help people understand what their role is in making forest healthy and viable parts of their communities.
Education is much cheaper than regulation, and educated landowners will do the right thing, given the right kind of incentives. And we could never regulate the entire forest, or we'd have to own it, like most countries, nations in the world do. Most forests are public because they're considered so valuable. The United States is the largest land area and single government that has so much of its forest heritage under private stewardship.
Half of the forest in this nation, actually a little bit more than half the forest in this nation, is privately owned. current estimates by the U.S. Forest Service suggest that it's 10 or 12 million people. And those 10 or 12 million people make individual decisions in the context of their own needs. And putting on the table sort of the ideas of sustainable forest management, what are the principles that we need to engage? How do we think about the long-term sustainability of an ecosystem when we have individual needs and demands? And how do we think about it in a context across landscapes, and even property to property? What does my neighbor do? What do I do? If we can take the ideas of sustainability and engage the individual private landowners, which is a pretty major task, and I think it's only going to be accomplished through education and outreach, sort of providing the data to people so they understand what the question is, helping them have the discussion where they live, and to get people to think about making decisions not as individuals but as a community of people who care about woods and trees. I think that's a role that the Roundtable could easily play.
If you go back and look at the reasons why we decided as a nation that we wanted to protect forests in the public domain, create the national forest that we see today in the western United States, and also with laws like the Weeks Act in 1911 that created the Eastern National Forest. Those were driven first and foremost by concerns over water.
The Australians talk about being a landholder rather than a landowner. And it's fundamentally an interesting approach to think about how I hold it for the next generation, not how I own it for myself. And so I think a lot about passing forward the ideas that forests are going to be here after we're gone, and we need to take care of them.